Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk, the show that brings you the most important conversations in art, culture, and ideas. I'm Sharaad Kuttan. I'm here in Johor Bahru in particular, the capital of the state where I was born. It's particularly pleasing to me to walk down memory lane with Peggy Loh. She's the author of 2 volumes of Johor Stories, My Johor Stories 1 and 2. Peggy, thank you so much for joining me on the show. It's a delight, as I said, because in part, my earliest memories are tied up with this city, Johor Bahru. Not necessarily the largest state, though my grandfather, when he migrated from India, first settled in Muar, and then eventually the family settled in Johor Bahru. So I look at the landscape and it triggers me constantly. We're in Suasana Suites, and you were telling me before the show that this is the location of 2 important cinemas.
That's right.
Very much part of my childhood.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about yourself in relation to the city.
Right. Where we are now, we are in the heart of the Heritage Center. And I grew up just a little bit up the road here because in our school-going years, we lived with our grandparents at Jalan Niheng. And Jalan Niheng was a long road because that road was a center of Chinese development. Niheng is the name of the Teochew clan. And now the road has reduced to very short only. And the landmark building there used to be my grandfather's house, a double-story bungalow with a badminton court next to it. It's very easy for you, formerly from the St. Joseph School, to identify where it is because the back gate leads right down to Jalan Niheng in front of my grandfather's house. And I always remember many of the school boys would come to the shop next door to buy ice ball to eat. And they walk to school and back to school eating this refreshing ice ball.
You know, this is going to be a conversation where I'm just going to be triggered every time. You said ice ball, and I remember that distinctly as a kind of thing that we all look for, long for after a game of football or running around in the neighborhood, right? And you're right, saying this is the heritage set, but it is shrinking. Where it's surrounded by high-rise and swanking, glass and steel towers. Remnants, because the church I was baptized in, the school, as you said, that I went to, all around are still there in pockets, right?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and how do you came to be a writer? Because these 2 volumes really capture and the stories that are really important. It's not just the artifacts, the built heritage, the things. It's the stories that make these things come alive, right?
Well, I enjoy writing as a hobby. And even as a child, I like to write journals, notes. And one of my earliest writing that was published was Letter to the Editor in the New Straits Times. And my dad is the one who helped me to fine-tune the letter. It's really during a school-going years, when you see your letter published in the newspapers, the thrill of seeing your work published is the same thrill that you have when you see your work published. And from that time onwards, I have always been jotting and making notes. Even when I'm going downtown to watch the annual Chingay parade, instead of just going to enjoy, I'll be jotting notes as well. I think I'm the only weird one who was doing that. But I think all these things are collections in my mind that now I can share it with other people through my writing.
Can I say one thing, though, about note-taking, is that when my mother first published her novel, her first novel, she said it was the result of 30 years of note-taking. And so, note-taking, I think, is an extraordinarily important exercise for the writer. Yes. I'm a journalist, and I have notebooks stretching back decades that I've kept because they were so important to the way in which I started to sketch my story.
Yes.
But you had a particular break, I understand, in terms of the publication of your stories. Could you tell us a little bit about how these stories came to be published and why you then went on to want to collect them as a book?
Okay, let's fast forward to the time when I was able to apply to a job with the Travel Times, the travel section of the New Straits Times. Out of the blue, I saw an advertisement, and when I applied for it, there was no reply. For 6 months, I heard nothing, and I almost forgot about it. And then, almost 6 months was up, I get a phone call to say, come for an interview. And I said, okay, KL. So I went to KL for the interview, and the editor at that time just told me, in 2 weeks' time, you get a letter from us. I was skeptical because I said, you took 6 months to call me. Don't tell me in 2 weeks I'll get my letter. And she did. And there I was, the Johor-based writer for the Travel Times. So I started writing travel-related stories, and I was so proud to share Johor Stories for this nationwide distribution paper. So as I was doing stories about Johor heritage, I enjoyed especially talking about the culture and heritage, about craftsmen, handicrafts. And one particular assignment I did, our editor made it into a 2-part series about southern craftsmen. And when I saw the stuff that came out, I said, it's a pity that it came out only once in the travel paper. So I approached the Johor Bahru Bureau and asked editor, can I please feature these craftsmen in the Johor section? At that time, it was called J-Buzz, Johor Buzz. And he says, yeah, why not? And he put it on the cover and center spread of the Johor Buzz. And that's where I started writing for the Johor section. And he said, you anak Johor? I said, yes, I'm a true blue anak Johor. And he said, why don't you write for the opinion page as well? So that's where I started writing my Johor stories. And I shared my experiences of growing up in Johor Bahru and what people call it, your grandfather's stories. And that's how I started getting followers. People were calling up the bureau to ask the bureau chief, who's the writer? So the bureau chief has a few smart remarks to reply to the callers. And very soon I started getting followers. And I meet them in town. They say, hey, what was yesterday's story? I missed the paper. And in those days, I can't tell you what is my story tomorrow or when it will come out because it joins a queue. So I thought of how am I going to let my readers read my stories? So I started a blog. And that blog is the same identity that I have, my Johor Stories blog. And that's where I store my published stories, and I also write exclusive stories to store in the blog. So that's how I started regularly writing for the blog and for the newspaper.
Wonderful. There's a certain pain that comes, I think, from returning to the place of your origin and things that animate your childhood memories, right? So when I explore Johor today, yes, I see bits and pieces of what was there, but so much has changed. And Johor's rapid development has meant that entire neighborhoods have either been wiped out or reconfigured.
Yes.
I'm thinking of my grandmother's house in Jalan Dapat, which is no longer there. In some sense, your work recovers some of that, right? So you do work that excavates the past and reminds us of things that have actually, in fact, disappeared.
That's right.
How do you begin to do that? I mean, I know you start with your family, but if you're going to, as it were, serve a larger readership, you're going to have to expand. So tell us a little bit about the choices you've made as a writer, what you focused on, where you're moving to, especially in your second volume.
So what happened is I started with mostly my grandfather's stories, but especially in book 1, I also featured portraits. That means people in Johor who have impacted other lives. And these are people whom you probably are familiar with. Some of them are personalities that once you mention the name, everybody says, yeah, I know him, I know her. And these are collections precious not just to me, but to the families because some of them are gone already.
Right, so you have here Desmond Pereira, Don Perry, Ramla Muhammad, Amy Wong, James Ho. Maybe we could just pick out some of them, because you're absolutely right. We all have or remember places connected to individuals, right? And I know you wrote about the Kerala restaurant.
That's right.
And anybody who was in Johor in the 70s will remember that place as a go-to kind of restaurant. Tell us a little bit about some of the people that you mentioned in your book.
So in book 1, as I said, mostly I talked about Johor personalities and then culture and heritage of Johor. But in book 2, I went a little bit further, which is not just Johor Bahru, but outside of Johor Bahru, in the other districts, including Muar, Kluang, Batu Pahat. The personalities I featured in book 2, interesting places and inspirational people, are people that I already know, maybe by family contact, or I featured them in my articles previously. And I was very pleased to share their stories with my readers because they are inspiring. So for example, a family in Muar, they are a family of doctors and lawyers. But how did they start? It was a very humble beginning. Father was a rubber tapper. And that's how inspiring they are. And for example, the family in Kluang, if you go to Kluang and you didn't have a coffee at the railway station Kopitiam, you haven't been to Kluang. So I was able to get the story out from the family as well, and how the father came to Johor with such a humble beginning, and they started a small Kopitiam, and now look at where they are. They are a brand that sells Kluang. So in my time that I connect with these people, they were very comfortable to share with me all their stories, including the heritage traders, like, for example, the Kerala restaurant, the Miho Singki, and Haji Wahid Mi Rebus. These are my family friends. I knew them from way back because our family used to patronize their shop. So, for example, the noodle shop. The grandfather came with a push cart and started selling from Jalan Meldrum. And now, the grandson has a cafe on the 6th floor of Johor Bahru City Square, one of the most popular shopping malls in the city.
Right. These are wonderful stories. Like I say, every other word is a trigger for me. Okay, we're going to take a short break, and we're going to come back with more on Let's Talk. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm Sharaad Kuttan. With me, Peggy Loh, the author of My Johor Stories, Volume 1 and 2. And this second volume comes with a wonderful map that tells you where the stories are from. If you don't have a mental map of Johor, this is, I think, would be extraordinarily helpful. I have a mental map because not only did I grow up in Johor Bahru, but I would travel up north and we took the train. And so all the train stations became very important markers. But I'm looking at that and I can see the east coast of Malaysia has, of Johor has much less representation. Again, when it comes to this, was this second volume less personal than the first volume? Was this more about kind of taking that idea that you had in the first book and going beyond the personal connections that you had?
I say it has got the same link simply because I still share my memories in book 2 as a continuation of what I shared in book 1. Because what happened was, if you looked at the cover of the book, you will see some faces. And these people are important because I was listening to my grandmother when she talked about these people, but she refers to them with Chinese phrases and titles. And every time she talks about it, I hear her, but I don't remember what it is for. But as I started working and doing research with the Chinese community here, I managed to join the dots and I realized our family link to Mr. Wong Afuk, the founding father of Johor Chinese community. In fact, the main road in Johor Bahru was named after him. So the connection is very clear. And when I went to the Chinese Association, they managed to dig up this old photograph for me, and it's on the cover of book 2. He is the nephew of Mr. Wong Afuk, who was brought in here to be his business manager. And the Wong family of Johor Bahru was from him. The line is from him. And right now, many family members are still here, but scattered. And many of them probably didn't know the connection until after they read my book. And I'm very pleased to say that because of my stories with the family connections, it has begun to link people back to Johor Bahru. In fact, one of the family members of Mr. Wong, who's migrated to Canada, when he read my stories online, he called the editor and asked the editor how to get in touch with me. And that's how we connected. And he came to Johor Bahru, and I was able to show him the Johor Bahru that his mother's side of the family was from, and I was able to introduce him to some of the family members here too. So my Johor Stories has been connecting people and families to JB.
I understand you did a TED Talk, and could you tell us a little bit about that?
It was quite a challenge, really, to be able to speak from a script for 18 minutes, but I managed to do that. And the title was Connecting People Through My Johor Stories. Just as what I was sharing about Mr. Wong's family, there were others who came to Johor because they read my Johor Stories. In book 1, I did a story on historic hills and palaces. And this is about Johor Bahru has got many hills and many palaces. A total stranger, an Englishman in England, when he read these names of the places, he said, hey, it sounds very familiar, because he read his grandmother's memoirs. And again, he wrote to me and said to me, I'm coming to the Far East, and I'm going to stop in Johor Bahru. Can we meet? And I said, yes. And when he came, Richard and his wife, I showed him all the places that listed out in his grandmother's memoirs in Johor Bahru, because his grandfather used to work for the Johor government. So that was very exciting, because I'm listening to his stories and I want to show him the places, and we had a very good time, a good stay in Johor Bahru. And he and his wife, I took them for food and the tours, and because of the evenings, I said, how am I going to occupy his evening? So happened Johor, we had a classical music festival that time, and I got tickets to go. I said to him, Richard, you can go back and have a shower. I'll pick you up in the evening to go for the show. And when we drove past Jalan Niheng, I pointed to him. This was where my grandfather's house used to be. And I briefly told him about my grandfather. And when I went to pick him up from the hotel to go out for the evening appointment, he brought his laptop into the car. I said, why is he bringing a laptop when we're going to a concert? But he was so excited, he opened the laptop to show me an old newspaper article that he dug up from, I think, Straits Times Singapore at that time, which showed his grandfather's name and my grandfather's name reported in the same article, because our grandfathers were acquainted with each other because they played with the same badminton association of Johor Bahru.
Badminton brought people together.
That's right.
And you too. And
I didn't know. I didn't know at all, because he's a total stranger and I'm just showing him Johor Bahru. And when he showed me that article, I was really stunned. So when I went home, I told my mom, I was so excited, I said, Richard's grandfather, Mr. F.M. Still, knows our grandfather. And my mom was very cool. She said, yes, I know Mr. Still. I said, Mom, how do you know? Because my mom was the eldest daughter. She would probably know my grandfather's friends. She says, we actually have a photo of him in the album. I said, please show it to me. It's in the book now. If you turn the page, you'll see a nice photo. In fact, it's on the cover of the book. Mr. F.M. Still is seated, and my grandfather and the Wong brothers with my grandfather in the same team. And among the Wong brothers that my grandfather trained, the most popular of whom is Mr. Wong Peng Soon, All England champion, was my grandmother's cousin.
And Mrs. Still wrote her memoirs?
No. The mother. It would be the mother.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So memoir writing, like your two volumes, extraordinarily important.
Yes.
I know that in Muar, once named Bandar Maharani, I think, has a time capsule. I think it was planted a century ago. I don't know if they've ever dug it up. But clearly these two volumes, if there was a time capsule planted today for future generations, these two volumes should be in there. I do want to ask you, though, your opinion about change in Johor Bahru in particular, in the city. Has enough been done to preserve the past, to preserve those memories, both in the built forms, in the buildings, but also in the names of roads? Is there a concerted effort to recognize the value of this heritage?
I'm glad to say, at least in my interaction with the community here, that at least the Chinese community is doing something about it, because they have a Johor Bahru Chinese Heritage Museum. And more recently, there is a museum of the 24 festive drums. And of course, the Cantonese Association, still using the building donated by Mr. Wong Afuk, has got the Kwang Siu Gallery. And these are the places where they keep the artifacts and the history and the heritage of the people of Johor Bahru who were important in the founding years. So for the Indian community, they just started an Indian Heritage Center, but again, because of the COVID, they delayed opening it.
Right. Has enough been done by the city? Do you think the city...
Not enough. Definitely not enough. I work with the Yayasan Warisan Johor, which is the Johor Heritage Foundation. They've got some very interesting things in the foundation, but again, there's not enough done because everybody's doing their own thing, so there is no concerted effort really. So we need to work on that, and so that when visitors come, they know where to go and what to do about it. So sometimes you just don't know where.
Okay, so what's next for you, Peggy? You have these two beautiful volumes. Is there a third coming up?
Yes, there is. It's a work in progress, and again, because of the COVID and the lockdowns, there has been a bit of a delay, but I'm hopeful that the book will come out by this year.
And what's going to be in this book?
So in book 2, I focus mainly on interesting places and inspirational people, and heritage traders. So in book 3, what I aim to do is to talk about proudly Johor. So there are brands that are established in Johor, that are only available in Johor, and also these brands which have been exported abroad. So I'm working on that collection.
Can you give us an example of some of these brands?
I like to talk about the 24 festive drums. It is a proudly Johor-born heritage, although they use Chinese drums, but it was born here in Johor Bahru. And this art of drumming has been exported back to China and across the world, and later into Africa. So it is really a very proud heritage from Johor.
Right. And any last example of a Johor brand that I believe Mary Brown came up in conversation recently?
Yes.
That's Johor?
Yes, that's very Johor. But there are others also which are less recognized. I want to mention about the Johor Area Rehabilitation Organization. The short form is JARO. It is a very Johor brand because these are handicrafts made by people with disabilities, established here as a rehab center for TB recovering patients. But now it is a center for people with disability who are putting their skills to creating handicrafts which are useful. And this brand is something that has been exported abroad because people buy it to give as gifts.
You know, Peggy, I lived a stone's throw away from Jaro,
Yeah.
and Christmas presents often came from
right.
Jaro, and a wonderful collection. And I'm talking about in the 70s, so
Yes.
amazing. I'm so glad it's still going
is.
strong. As I'm glad that you are and continue to write. So congratulations on the 2 books, and I look forward to the 3rd.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
I've been speaking to Peggy Loh. She's the author of My Johor Stories, both first volume and second volume. The 3rd one is coming up. This has been Let's Talk with Sharaad Kuttan, only on Astro AWANI.